We're here with Jennifer Belle for her new Swanna In Love release on
Akashic.
this book had me sobbing. It's beautiful. And this is your fifth, possibly sixth, fifth novel, correct?
It's my fifth novel, but it's my first novel in 13 years.
Which makes
So
it
it feels very new.
very, very special.
Feels like my first book, but it's not.
Well, isn't it kind of like that when you haven't had sex in like 13 years?
Yes, I'll let you know if I ever have sex again, what it's like.
Okay, well, that's another conversation.
Already
First,
off to a
when
great
did
start.
this when did this come? When did you give birth? I mean, actually, it's not because to me, h- the whole process of writing a book over such a long period of time or whatever period of time and putting it out, it is labor. It is very similar to giving birth. And to me, it is like it's a child that you bring into the world. So when was
Like,
this published?
it's officially published on Tuesday, January 30th will be the pub date.
Wow.
So it hasn't come out yet. You and a few people are the only people to have read it.
Oh my gosh, I feel very hashtag honored.
Well, you said to me for years, write another book, write another book. If you ever write another book, I want to interview you. Write another book. And so I finally did, and here I am, and I can't believe it. I'm finally here with you.
Well, I'm very, very, very excited because excuse me, I remember when what book was it that your last one we were sitting
My
and
last book was The 7 Year Bitch, and it was 13 years ago,
okay,
and
that.
or maybe more. I've kind of lost track. But I was writing the whole time. It wasn't that I wasn't writing. Um, I just was writing, I was writing a different book, and this book, Swanna In Love,
A point behind you.
um, over there
Great.
was a tiny little flashback in that book. And
Hmm.
I wanted to write that so much, but I just didn't think I could. It's about a 14-year-old girl who has a love affair, a sexual affair with a 38-year-old married dad. And
Yeah.
I didn't think I could do it in this climate of publishing political correctness. And I didn't think I could do it at all. I didn't think I could write it. Um, but I wanted to write about this thing that happened to me when I was picked up at camp by my mother and her new boyfriend and brought to an artist colony that didn't allow kids. And my brother and I had to sleep in a truck outside this artist colony. And I always wanted to write that, but I just didn't have it in me to do it. And then during COVID, something happened a couple of things happened that made me able to just write it. And over the course of a year and a half, the book just came pouring out of me. And that's what this book is.
I wanted to ask how personal it was because it seemed to have such a personal drive, like it didn't seem something that was just kind of randomly created. But I also find while writing my memoir, how many things that I thought were fictional have a one-to-one correlation
Hmm.
that I even hid from myself. So it's interesting to hear with Swanna how much it is your from a lot of it from your experience, or at least the
The,
premise.
the, the first half is a lot from my experience. I will say, and it's very personal. And then one of the reasons I didn't think I could write the story is because I couldn't remember much about the story. I couldn't I'm really foggy even on how old I was or a lot of the details. And I didn't think it would be interesting enough to have this girl sleeping in this truck with her little brother. I just didn't think that was a book. And then I came up with the idea to have her pursue this married man and be the aggressor and try to use him to get home to New York. And that is fiction, but it's really based on a lot of experiences I had with older men when I was younger.
It's funny because I had questions about that, and so much Werner Herzog says that, the first thing to go out the window is context, or maybe it's just, he said, how context is so important. Kind of says both of those things, and it's understanding the 80s. And I think for so many people, uh, it's it's hard to get how recently the idea that a young girl, it was normalized for a young girl to be with an adult. It was still, well, not quite okay, but yet it was. I mean, I had all my friends that were in relationships with all these rock stars.
Right.
I had 14-year-old friends that were dating The Clash and Billy Idol and uh, Pete Townsend and all these people. I mean, they 13, 14, you're ready over the hill when you're 16. So
Well, it's important to remember that it's in the 80s, which was obviously a very different time. And yeah, I mean, when I was really struggling with deciding if this was even viable for readers today, I talked to my friend in LA. I had lunch with her and I was like, I don't know if this book will sell. I don't know. I don't know. And she just went on and on about her stories of dating having sex with the limousine driver at the prom instead of with her prom date, or making out with the bartender at her friend's bat mitzvah instead of not making out with him. So
yeah, some
I just
awkward.
remembered it wasn't I mean, my story is pretty out there. It's pretty wild, but it's not as crazy as people think.
Let's get right to it. I mean, there's a line in here, I think it's page 280, where hang on one second. You say it's even dog-eared. But you say that I was an adult molester. I think that's the line. The feeling that she molested the man, she seduced him. She's the molester, she forced him. The idea that an underage girl molests a man is, I'll just say this. I don't think that there needs to be an answer. I'm not asking you to adjudicate this. I took est when I was 13. I had a very, very similar experience with summer camp, but I'll get into that later. I was one of the youngest members to ever take est. How do you describe est? Like
Well, now it still sort of exists, but it has different. Now it's called Landmark.
Landmark, the forum.
It was Mind Spring, it was the Forum, and now it's Landmark.
Right. It's like you take this kind of these weekend seminars, or this intensive, and it changes you profoundly. And I was 13 and I was hanging out with all these men in their 30s and 40s, and I didn't understand why they had a problem with it. You
That you
know,
were there.
yeah, or no, that we were hanging out because I was taking
Oh,
seminars.
oh,
They were
right.
hanging out with me. I'm like, what's the problem with kissing? What's the problem with, like, they were freaked out by it a little bit, and I didn't understand why, because it was not in the culture. It was the idea that it was deeply problematic for an adult man to be friends, let alone sexual,
Well,
with.
right. I think it is problematic, and
Yes, it
I think
is.
there are laws against these things for a reason, but you make a good point that you didn't feel like you were doing something wrong, or that they were doing something wrong, or it doesn't feel inappropriate, because at 13 certain girls can be quite mature. But of course the man in my book is doing something wrong, of course, but the book is from the point of view of the girl, and she doesn't feel that way.
Right, right. Because you don't, at that age, you don't know. And you realize it when you're older,
Yeah.
the effect.
My book takes place in 8 days, so I don't deal with the after effects. It's just her experience for those 8 days.
Right. And I guess it what happens is an unraveling where it's kind of revealed that she's sort of an unreliable narrator, but she's also who she is. She is uniquely of herself. So she's also 14. So trying to make sense in this very sophisticated and the childlike voice and experiences shines through, kind of painfully pokes through. And sometimes I like the way there's this kind of a cloud overlay, and then sometimes there's enough break in her defenses where she starts talking about what really happened at school. And
Hmm.
you don't find out that she left school until later.
She left one school and goes to another school
Right.
because she was struggling. My parents' divorce was very traumatic for me, and I was a
Over you?
pretty tough, knowledgeable kid. I was like 11 or 12, and yeah, I was really turned around with that. And I thought I knew everything. I mean, I was completely prepared, and I as soon as I read Judy Blume's book, It's Not the End of the World, I knew it would happen to me. I probably read that book when I was 9 or 10 or 11, and from the minute I read that book, I was just waiting for my parents to announce. So I was prepared. I was the oldest one in my grade. In my they call it a friend group now. We used to call it a clique.
Right.
I was the oldest one to get my period, to lose the first one to get my period, to lose my virginity, and to have divorced parents.
Wow.
But I've given in the book, I've given her a wiser friend at camp who also helps her with the ropes.
And it's interesting, I caught her name. Her name is kind of a variation of your name, Jackie Beller.
Well, this is not I'm not that proud of this, but it it's based on the name, not necessarily the girl, but there was a girl in my high school named Jackie Bellis, and she was very cool and very sporty and not really like me, and I based this character on her. And then just this morning, I was scrolling on social media, and I haven't seen her or heard of her in ever since high school, actually. And her picture and name came up on my social media, so it's so funny that you're mentioning her. But it
Did
was
you, I see, I thought it was like this very kind of sly sort of inserting
myself as right.
yeah. I mean,
Well,
you
I
could,
I really am all my characters. I don't know if you find that. I mean, I'm everybody, and I I'm I when I wrote my first book, I realized I was
name your
the
first book, please.
my first book was called Going Down. You told me to introduce. This
Yes.
was the first cover of my first book, and I think it's the greatest cover ever.
Right.
This was Riverhead. All my books were Riverhead until this last one. The current cover of this book is a girl with a lollipop. It's very suggestive and weird. So it's weirdly matches. And in a way, I feel like my new book, Swanna In Love, could be a prequel to this book, except all the names are different and everything. But it's very much the same character, but 5 years old, 5 years younger.
That's exactly what, yeah, because going down the character's 18 and could that be the younger, like Swan is a younger,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. And then my
yeah.
second book was called High Maintenance. This cover, the woman looks like Fran Drescher. So
Yes,
I don't know why, but
yes,
that. And then my third book was called Little Stalker.
great.
And my fourth book was called The 7-Year Bitch. And this was 13 years ago. This is about my marriage. And then I wrote a children's book I'm proud of called Animal Stackers, illustrated by David McPhail. So those are my books.
Wow, that's fantastic.